That's why I believe in you, because that is the greatest purpose. It's to love. Honest. It sounds corny, whatever you want to say. I don't care. I love people because there is freedom and power in loving people.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life, well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the one who will be here with you each and every Wednesday, interviewing a different consciousness changemaker that is also out there working tirelessly to help catalyze change and expand awareness all across Spaceship Earth. On the other 4 weekdays, you can hear me discussing topics such as my favorite thought-provoking quotes, reading and discussing wisdom from empowering books, playing clips from various inspirational spiritual teachers, sharing a bit of mysterious news, taking questions from the audience, and essentially digging into any other mind-expansive topics that will help keep your soul fed by tuning you into positive vibrations on a consistent basis. And you guys have heard me say that if I ever run ads on the show, it will only be with a company that I fully support because I believe their intention is to make a positive difference in the world. Well, I'm pleased to announce that day has arrived and that this episode of the Positive Head Podcast is being brought to you thanks to the support of Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. All right, all you positive heads, for this week's special guest, I have my youngest guest to date here with me on the show, Jake Heilbrunn. However, Jake is not your average 20-year-old. Before he was out of your teens, Jake had already explored Central America alone without a cell phone, and he recently released his first book, Off the Beaten Trail, that tells the tale of his adventures and what he learned along the way. Hey there, Jake. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brandon. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. It's very timely to have you. I have a son who just turned 18, and we've been talking. He turned last weekend, and we've been talking for the last few weeks about having him on the show and introducing him to the listeners and kind of getting his perspective. A younger man, man now. Wow, that's funny for me to say. A younger man's perspective on all this, magic in the world that I constantly talk about, and so this is not too far removed from that. You just turned 20, right?
Yes.
So anxious to kind of get your perspective on many things. But I will start at the same place I always start when I have a guest on, and that is I'd love to hear what your passion is. You're in an elevator. The guy next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You've got 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
My passion is definitely connecting with like-minded people who are driven and ambitious, who want to make a difference in the world, and creating ways to make that happen, whether that's, through writing or making a video or speaking. I love collaborating with people and just creating stuff.
Excellent. That's a very good passion that I can relate to. And so why don't you start and tell us a little bit about your story? You dropped out of college to go journey in Central America. What brought that on?
Yeah, well, the journey really began. The whole story started about 3 days after I arrived at college. I was excited. I grew up in this community, really fortunate enough to have the opportunity to go to college. And I kind of thought that was my next step. I never really questioned it.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in San Diego.
Okay, so you're not very far from me.
Yeah. And so 3 days after I arrived at college, I was at the Ohio State University. And I broke out in hives and rashes, like all over my legs and arms. And Yeah, I had no idea why. They were really aggravating. And unfortunately, almost every day for the rest of the semester, I just kept breaking out in these hives and rashes. And after about a month and a half in, I saw a doctor, immunologist, dermatologist. I had all the pills, creams, test tubes, and they didn't know what was causing it either. So they diagnosed me with chronic urticaria, which is like a fancy name for saying, hey, kid, your skin's freaking out, and we don't know why. So like, here's a name for it. And, I was 18 years old. I was halfway across the country. I didn't really know, I'd made some friends at this point. I was doing well in school, but I was really unhappy. I had developed severe anxiety, and prior to this experience, anxiety was just a word to me, but I now knew what it felt like. It was like this ball that would roll up in my throat, and I started to question the why in like almost every aspect of my life. And, after a couple months of like questioning, I realized like I had no passion or drive to be in school. It was not fulfilling me, although I was doing well. And my real passion was to explore another way of life. And this idea just kept coming into my head, like, taking some time off from school to travel. And, after many months, I finally made the leap to do it. And then I found an opportunity to teach English through this it's called Workaway. It connects volunteers and like travelers and hosts from all over the world. So I found this guy in the north of Guatemala. And I was like, I'm 18. I have no professional skills, but I'm willing to make a difference in any way I can. He was like a total badass, like ex-military, spent 8 years in hostage raid and recovery in like Iraq and Afghanistan. And was just like, yeah, like come on over. Like, when you get to Guatemala, you just like take a 9-hour bus here, take a taxi here, and then just ask for Chris the Gringo, because the homes don't have addresses and there's no Wi-Fi. And I was like, okay. So I packed my backpack. I ditched my cell phone, and that was because I felt like I was not really using social media in the healthiest way. Like I felt like I just needed to get away from it. I was always sort of comparing myself to people, like trying to maybe keep up with the Joneses type thing, And I just like needed to get away from it. So I ditched my cell phone, packed my backpack, and I bought a one-way ticket to Guatemala. And that was the start of my journey.
Wow. That's pretty bold of you. How long were you, had you been in school when you dropped out?
I was there for a semester, and then interestingly enough, came back for the second semester. The first day back was the national championship football game, which in Ohio State, that's like a religion there. And then they won the game, woke up the next day, was like, okay, something's really wrong, because I feel miserable. Everyone around me was happy. And then I ended up coming home that Friday and getting my money back for that semester. Wow.
Very, very interesting. So you end up in Guatemala, and I'm assuming now your book tells the whole tale of everything that you sort of went through down there, right?
Yes.
You care to share some of, obviously you want people to read the book, and they can get the book. You recently released it I'm assuming it's available on Amazon and your website and places like that?
Yes, correct. Yes, I'd be happy to share one. Well, an interesting one happened the first day, actually. So I was supposed to be on this 9-hour ride to this northern town, and the bus gets stopped because there's like an accident way up ahead that we can't even see. We're on this one-way road in like the middle of nowhere, it feels like. And for 8 hours, everyone on the bus just hops out and it hangs out on the side of the road with all these other people. And I didn't know it was going to be 8 hours, but like, I remember being so surprised at how calm it was, like to the Guatemalans. I mean, I was the only like foreigner, it seemed, on that bus. And like, none of them were disturbed by it. And I remember thinking, oh my God, if this was my home, after 20 minutes, people would be starting to sue this driver to get them where they needed to be, like freaking out. And it was a really interesting perspective switch for me. And then another thing, while I was waiting for 8 hours, I was like, I couldn't really speak Spanish. And I'm like, how can I communicate with these people? This is such a great opportunity. And then I kind of had an idea pop up. So I went into my backpack, grabbed my deflated soccer ball, pumped it up, got back outside, started kicking it around. And, a couple of the guys were interested who were just, also sitting by the side of the road, and they started kicking it around with me. And I ended up making friends through that. So that was like the nonverbal communication. And that was, something I used all throughout traveling. So that was like a first lesson of like, necessity is the mother of invention. How can I be resourceful, without being able to speak? So that was an interesting, literally first day experience.
Wow. So how long were you down there, and what did you do once you got there?
Yeah, so I was down there. I was in Central America for about 4 months. I started in this town in Guatemala for 6 weeks, and I would say about 80% of that 6 weeks was spent teaching English, so in the schools and like living in the local town. But interesting enough, right when I got there, it was Semana Santa, which is like the most holy week in Guatemala. So they had school off. And so I get there, I arrive, and then 2 days after I arrive, we set off on a 6-day, 75-mile trek through the jungle and exploring the ancient Mayan ruins and pyramids, like deep in the jungle. Yeah, and I'd never
Was that part of your plan? I mean, was that part of your plan, or is this just something that was going to happen and you sort of tagged along?
I get there having no idea that's even a thing. And he says, do you want to come with us to the jungle? And I'm like, never been camping before. I'm like, sure, like, let's do it. Right?
That's so crazy. That's like such a 7 days in the jungle, having never camped or, no sort of outdoors experience is intense.
Yeah. Like
I've been down to Ecuador. I know how intense that jungle is down there.
Yeah, man. And the second or third night, one of the days we had our longest trek, it was like 23 or 24 miles, I think. And you're right. It's like 100 degrees. It's like dry. There's not a ton of water. Like we're carrying our water. We have some mules that are taking our stuff. And this is not like a touristy hike. Like we did not really see anyone for this week other than our group of 12. But the second night I get sick. I mean, I remember we're laying at this campsite. We're just laying in the grass, looking at the most clear night sky I've ever seen, like with stars. I saw a shooting star, and I remember just like, wow, this is so cool. And then all of a sudden, I just feel like this headache come on, and my stomach starting to rumble, and not in a good way. And I got so sick that night, I like thought I was going to die.
I think it was from the water or the food, or
I think it was just from adjusting, because luckily it was just kind of a night bug, and it's funny. The chapter 10 of my book is called Praying to the Shit Gods. I don't mean to be part of my French, but the guy, like I told you, the guy I was staying with was such a badass, and like he was laughing because he knew I would be okay, I guess. I don't know how he knew, but he said he saw me in the middle of the night, like just kind of like not having a good time. He was cracking up. I was like, man, that is not like, I was not thinking it was funny at the time, but yeah, like I'd never had that experience, and it was just, roughing it, but like also so much enjoying just being immersed in this jungle and like hiking upon atop a pyramid, and every direction you look and far as the eyes can see, you can only see trees, and just made me like question my life and made me realize how small I was in comparison to this world, but how equally invigorating and inspiring that was, because I'm like, man, this world's so big and I'm so small. There's no reason not to chase my dreams, because like, in the grand scheme of things, I am so small, but at the same time, my potential to make an impact, is limitless. So I had all these things, and I had a really bad skin breakout actually towards the end of that trip, because I have had sensitive skin, like I mentioned. And I remember being sort of in a grumpy mood, you could say, one of the mornings, like all over my legs. And we had to hike another like 15 miles. And one of the guides, one of the local Guatemalans, like sees my pants my shorts rolled up. And he says, I didn't even know what he said, but he went into the bushes and got out these like purple plants and mushed them up and squeezed this juice on my legs. And look, I don't think the juice did anything for my skin, but it was like something about the fact that he went out of his way to do that, like total mindset shift. And I was like, just so grateful to be there. I started just appreciating the moment. I was like, you know what? Maybe I do have this really uncomfortable heat rash, but I'm going to enjoy every damn moment of the rest of this trek. And so that was another pretty, I don't know, maybe a key moment on my journey.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great lesson taken. It's always perspective. And that's what, of course, we talk about on the show constantly. And you can look at the situation and see all the awful things in it, or you can look at the situation and see the beauty in it. And it literally determines whether you're in heaven or hell, right?
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah. So wow. So you get to go see these pyramids and these Mayan ruins. I mean, what was that like? Was that a pretty overwhelming experience?
Yeah, like it was cool because after I got to do that experience, I went to this place called Tikal. I don't know if you've ever heard of Tikal, but it's much more of a touristy place where there's more pyramids. It's in the north of Guatemala as well, and it's this essentially fully excavated. Like you can see the full form of the pyramids, but where we were in this trek and exploring the ruins, like they were covered in trees. Like it was almost like a mountain of trees. And once you get close and start climbing it, of course it's, stone and it's a pyramid, but like it's so deeply immersed in the jungle. And I remember just like could not believe that, 2,000 years ago, there were like tens or hundreds of thousands of people living in this jungle. And essentially you would have had no idea had it not been for these periods. I mean, the jungle just swallowed it up, and learning a little bit about the history there was cool while we were exploring, and just getting to see like this aspect and historical site that is deserted. It was just fascinating to me.
Now, was anyone in your group? Did any of them speak English? Or were okay?
Yes, I don't know if I clarified that well. So, in the town I was staying there, so we essentially lived in a little shack right next door to this local family. And in that shack was like the volunteers. So it was Chris and his wife, the hosts. And then there was maybe 5 of us. So, someone from Switzerland, a volunteer from the Netherlands, a volunteer. One of them was from the US. Another one was from somewhere else. And then, so we would live with the family and like eat meals with them every day. But on the trip, it was like a group of us, and then he took a couple tourists. That's how he made money in Guatemala. Our host, he would take tourists on these trips, and so there was there was maybe 3 or 4. So like one of the brothers in the family came with us, and his friend, and then we also had 2 like local guides who came with us.
Right. I see. Well, that was good. At least I'm sitting there thinking for a moment, like, hold on, you were just in Guatemala and then now you're in the jungle all alone and no one else speaks English. But that's good that you weren't. That'd have been pretty intense, like having no one to even speak to right away. So yeah, man, that would have not have. I mean, actually, I don't know how it would have been, but it was definitely nice and very much appreciated to be able to converse in English. Yeah. Now, how long were you in Central America? I mean, did you left there and then journeyed elsewhere?
Yeah. So I spent 6 weeks essentially in that town with, jungle trips and little excursions combined. And then I made my way towards a couple other spots in Guatemala. And then I spent a month in Nicaragua and a month in Costa Rica. So a total of about 4 months.
Gotcha. Now, you shared with me a story, I guess, in Nicaragua where you were temporarily paralyzed. Tell me a little bit about that story.
Yeah. So I had met a lot of really cool people. And one of the coolest things about like solo travel is like a lot of people are like, well, like, isn't that lonely? Isn't that, like, how do you find things? And I would always meet people and they would say, oh, you got to check out this person or you got to check out this place. So I met this girl who told me about this community in Nicaragua. They were like a spiritual kind of like self-sustaining community. They lived on this island. They grew all their own food. And I don't know, she just said it was just the most powerful 2 weeks she had there. So I get to this community and like I said, all the buildings are made of cob. They grow their own food. It's like solar panel was powered by energy, like generating no waste. It was pretty incredible.
Wow.
And every morning of the weekday at 5:30 a.m., you wake up and you go down to the ashram overlooking this volcano. I mean, it was quite a sight to do like the morning meditation. And I had started trying to meditate on my travels. Like it was starting to like appeal to me, or at least to try it, but I'd not really, I struggled like focusing and this type of meditation, a lot of it varied. So it was like, a lot of it was intense breath work, like 5 rhythms dance. And one morning I get down there and he says, we're doing this thing called fire breath. And this is where the paralyzed part comes in. So
that's a Kundalini yoga sort of approach, which, pretty intense, fast breathing, right?
Exactly. It's almost like it's like transformative breathing, fire breath, quantum light breath. Like they're all names essentially the same thing. But you essentially breathe in and out like really rapidly, like through your mouth. And I guess the reason is like you kind of like bypass your conscious mind like into your subconscious, and it can help you kind of get in touch with yourself and potentially like, you know, fully feel like pain or experiences that you've pushed down, and it will like helps bring them up so you can experience them, and then you can get them out of your system so they don't continue to block you in areas of your life. So we're doing this, and you know, like this is my first time doing it. I don't know what to expect, and like all of a sudden, maybe like 30 minutes in, like I'm so into it, I don't really know what's going on. I'm dripping in sweat. I kind of become like aware of what's going on. I'm like, wait, like I can't move my arms.
Wow.
And I kind of started like having a minor freak out because I'm thinking, here I am like in Nicaragua. I'm like, oh my God, like what if I can never move my arms again? And it was like this really odd sensation. And of course, after like 15, 20 minutes, I just started like slowly breathing and like, you know, very slowly after like 10 minutes feeling the tingling in my arms. And like at one point I like lifted my head up trying to like move my arms, and I couldn't do it. It was like, you know, I was really like, what is going on? And of course, like I mentioned, it slowly came back, and I got that feeling back to me. And this was just one of the most powerful experiences of my life. And I remember afterwards, I went into my journal and I just like poured out what I had experienced, because I felt like in that moment, you know, or realizing after, I had sort of like I was kind of faced with an insecurity mind, like that I'd been living on this kind of false sense of reliance, in the sense that in high school and, you know, I was going to college, I was always a very like social guy, loved to party. And I realized that like alcohol and this whole party life was, of course it was fun, but I felt like it was sort of like, what was the need for it? I felt like I was living for the weekend. And I sort of realized that in a way I was fearing the person that I was becoming. Like I could never understand why certain people were like, could be so joyful and calm about nothing, you know, like these people who are so mindful and present. I was like, what is it? Like, how can they enjoy that? Like, don't they just want to have fun all the time? Like, I couldn't get it. And it was like, you know, over these 2 months, I was slowly like, you know, that was the person I was becoming. And it was like, I had to let go of this, you know, and the way I like to view it is like, it's not that I wasn't becoming anything different. I was slowly peeling back layers that had built up over time that weren't serving me. And it was like this moment where I said, I'm going to continue doing this. Like, I've never found so much peace and joy and happiness like on this path. And I want to, you know, continue living it and exploring the unknown and seeing where, you know, the depth of this can go. And so that was like a really powerful moment for me to have that realization.
Right. Very, very interesting. So are you continuing with your meditation practice now?
Yes, I am. And it's funny. So I've been in a program called, have you heard of Toastmasters?
You know, it sounds familiar, but I couldn't tell you what it is, but it seems like I've heard that at some point.
So it's basically it's like a speaking club where you practice like public speaking. I started that a year ago because I knew I would want to be speaking like at high schools and places. And my mentor in Toastmasters was a monk for 10 years. So he does these like breath session classes on Monday nights, essentially exactly what I just experienced. Like, I was like, wait, so I don't have to be in an ashram in Nicaragua to experience this? You know, and so I realized that what I experienced is actually called tetany, this like partial paralysis. And it's essentially from like hyperventilation, like excessive breathing. You know, your muscles cramp up, your jaw cramps up sometimes. So cool to know that you're not going to be paralyzed from breathing. But so good. It's funny. Before the show, you mentioned something about synchronicity. And I thought I would explain this because this is really fascinating to me, like how I'm fascinated by gut feelings and intuition. And I believe that when we do that, the universe works with us, not against us. And that can sound a little woo-woo sometimes, but so I'll share the story real quick. So I went last.
So this is your synchronicity story.
Yeah. So I'll explain it. So today's a Wednesday.
Okay, cool.
Today's a Wednesday. So last Monday, which was 9 days ago, I went to this class, and my intention, you kind of have an intention for each breathwork session, was clarity. And to give a little bit of context, so this is about a month after I published my book that I've been working on for essentially 16 months, so driven. I didn't know the slightest thing about writing a book, did a whole Kickstarter, all this stuff, just working really hard. And in the past 16 months, I have not really taken like a week off or even just a couple of days where I can't not think about my book and speaking and getting it out there. And when I was diving further, and I'm like, why is, what is it about this that's making me feel, now it's about a month after. So I feel like I have this like pressure to figure out my life, to figure out what's going to happen next after the book and stuff, because that was my only focus. And I was like, why, what is going on? Like, why do I feel this need? And I kind of came to the conclusion that, like, I guess dropping out of college and taking a different path, I felt like this need to be successful and have things figured out, because I had dared to take a different path. Like, I better have it figured out, or else people will call me, which of course is not, it's an egocentric thought, and it's not serving me, but it was just what I felt. And so I was asking for clarity. That was my intention, like just to have something come up. And for the last month, I had been thinking about going on this trip to Mexico for a week, and not 4 months, just a week this time. And the first half is like service. So we'll be helping renovate a school in Mexico City. And then the second half is like personal development, like hiking, yoga, exploring the culture. But, it was a little pricey, and I was like, I don't have much money right now, but it just kept going on my mind. So fast forward this Monday, I decide that I write all this in a blog post, like a personal reflection. I said, you know what? I'm purchasing this Mexico trip. So I do it. I purchase it. And literally right after I purchase, I check my email to find out that I won this contest. I've been in this like book marketing creation like group and program where they help you like, from concept to marketing and all that stuff. And I was one of the winners who submitted an essay on like what I've achieved, blah, blah, blah. And I won the exact amount of money that the trip cost. And I had already purchased the trip. And
that's like, so good.
Man, I could not believe it. Like the synchronicity. And, at the end of this blog article I write, like I know maybe it doesn't make sense, but I just felt like it was a gut decision. I had to go on this trip. And, I don't have the most money right now. And then literally the exact amount of money is awarded to me minutes later. Wow. It was like unbelievable.
That is an incredibly inspiring example of how the universe works. When you follow your heart, when you follow your gut, it will present things in a way that you just, that makes me think back to an interview I did a while back with Dr. Bruce Lipton. You may be familiar with. If not, you should check him out. He wrote a book called The Biology of Belief. Incredible guy. And he had a similar sort of thing that he shares in that interview. Just synchronicity in general. I mean, the amount of it in my life is so funny at this point. I mean, it's just like, it's almost like it's just the norm. Just this interview. To have you on, you're by far the youngest person that I've had on, and here I am. The hot topic of conversation in my house the last couple weeks has been my son going to college or following his passion, which he's decided in the last 6 months or so that he really wants to pursue acting. Well, what is that? Oh, that's really hard to do. You can't accomplish it. No one makes it. What's in the sort of ether with, the norm, right? Mm-hmm. And you're going to be a loser if you don't. And he goes to an art school now where it's all these overachievers who a lot of them go to like really amazing schools. And, so it's been a lot of like fear about following his path. So I'm anxious, first of all, to let him hear this episode with you. And it's just such amazing synchronicity, in my own life, hearing you dropped out of school, you leap of faith to follow where your heart was taking you. And, in his case, there's been all this synchronicity. So he kind of made the executive decision that he's going to take at least a year and pursue acting and not go to school. And literally the next day he goes to get his hair cut we have a family friend who cuts hair. There's a guy there who's like, first thing when he walks through the door, oh my gosh, you should be an actor. And he went on for like 30 minutes. Like this guy would not shut up about it. Then his friend texted him who wants to, do film, says, hey, I want to do this little movie and I want you to be in it, and shoot today. Like as this guy's ranting at him. Then we go this last weekend and for his 18th birthday, I get him a reading with Colby Psychic Rebel, who I interviewed a few weeks ago. She's here in LA and went up, and first thing out of her mouth when we sits down, okay, Daddy's not going to go to college acting. And she goes on to like basically say he has this like phenomenal career, which was just like very mind blowing for him and me. And, I'll bring him on sometime to actually share the story in detail. But so it was just like synchronicity after synchronicity. As soon as he sort of made the decision to follow his heart and not just his head, and that's, I think, the biggest lesson for anyone, especially, well, not just young people, but, there's a lot of young people out there who are so sort of brainwashed that they've got to go this traditional route. And hey, if you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a doctor, there's, an engineer, go to college, right? You need to. That's like that's the path. If you're going to do something off the beaten path, which is just as valid, the universe will come to your aid and support you when you take that leap of faith, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And man, I love that story. I mean, like, to me, it's just so fascinating because, like, we're, as humans, like, we're so much in our head, and I especially was so much in my head. But, like, I knew in my gut, heart, whatever you want to call it, that feeling that this is, like, what I feel like I should do. And, it was
right.
like that calling. And I love it.
Yep.
Steven Spielberg says intuition, it doesn't shout, it whispers, and it's up to you to listen closely, to tap into it. And I think a lot of people like, ask like, how do I tap into my intuition? And
Funny you should mention that, because the guy who was there when he was cutting the hair, when he was getting his hair cut the next morning after we made the executive decision, first thing out of his mouth, you should be an actor. I know Steven Spielberg. And the guy, and literally that's like what his reading too. She was like, you're so in tune with your intuition. She's like, just follow that. Whatever you do, if you sit down in a meeting and something doesn't feel right, don't listen to your head saying it would be weird to get up and leave. Listen to your intuition. Get up and leave. And I thought that was a really profound piece of advice for that Colby gave him, and really for any of us. How often does your intuition tell you something and you're saying, yeah, that'll be weird though if I kind of follow this gut instinct. Logic says you do this, and this in this situation, so I've got to like write it out, right? Don't start letting your soul be your pilot, as a great song by Sting. He talks about, let your soul be your pilot. How does your soul communicate? Through your intuition. And the more you tap into that muscle, the stronger it gets, and it will never steer you wrong. It's like having the answer to every question. You don't have to guess. You don't have to really listen. I mean, so much with your head to what's happening out there. You listen with your heart. You listen with your gut.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting the Positive Head podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on May 1st on the show Wisdom Teachings, host David Wilcock explores the scientific proof of ascension, DNA activation, and how interplanetary climate change is made possible with nested spheres of energy emanating from the galaxy. I mean, it'd be pretty hard to be more up my alley, right? As you guys all constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out.
And I think, so I mentioned Mondays when I made this decision. Have you heard of Thrive, the conference?
I have heard of Thrive, and I always think of it because when I always think I interviewed Foster Gamble and his wife Kimberly a while back, and they do Thrive Movement, which they did the documentary called Thrive. So a lot of times I think of that when I hear it, but I have heard of this as well, but I'm not as familiar.
Gotcha. So I just say this because this is kind of in the realm. I was at this conference called Thrive. It's about like making money matter. And there was this moment where over the weekend where one of the speakers, like this guy named Phil McKernan, he's like a filmmaker, powerful guy, thick Irish accent. And he was one of the speakers, and he was making it very interactive. Like none of the other speakers it was like almost felt like a Tony Robbins experience. Like he was getting people putting them on the spot. And this kid gets up there and he's like, like what books should I invest in? What courses do you recommend? And the guy in his thick Irish accent, he's like, man, like nothing. Like he's like, just stop. Like stop for a day, stop for a week, stop for a month. Like we're always just consuming. There's so much content. Like when do you ever take the time to just stop and get in touch with yourself? Because like that's where you'll find your clarity. That's where you'll find your truth. Right. And when he said that, it just like hit me to the core, because I have been consuming, creating, and I've never just taken some time to let the natural ideas that are within me flow up and let that, access that divine creativity, if you wanted to call it that. And so I thought that was really powerful.
Absolutely.
Not like a lot of the speakers were saying that, but he said it, and I was like, wow, it resonated with me.
Yeah, it makes me think of one of my favorite teachers. Osho says, "Don't just do something; sit there." And it is definitely a. It's definitely a great piece of advice, because I'm the same way. You're probably similar to me from talking to you. Someone who's a doer and do all these different ideas and constantly checking new things out. And when you can. And that's why I think I know meditation is so important, because it allows you to sort of put everything down, and instead of we're transmitters and receivers. Well, someone like you or I is transmitting a lot, right? But just as important, maybe even more important, is receiving, allowing things to come in. But if you're always in transmission mode, that's hard to. It's hard to let anything else in. So I think that's a very wise piece of advice. And, speaking of advice, I'd be curious, what would be the key lessons takeaway from your travels that you would have for anyone who's thinking about doing it, any young people that are thinking about doing it, or not necessarily just young people, but there's a lot of young people that feel very drawn to this sort of go out and adventure and see the world. I know that's another thing that is very heavy on my son's mind, kind of doing that sort of thing. So what would be the main lessons that you would say you learned, and what would be the main recommendations you would give?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's interesting to first note that as much as my book is about me leaving school and traveling, it is also equally nothing about leaving school and traveling. It's just a metaphor for the overarching message, which we kind of just touch on, is we must have the courage to listen to our inner voice, because when we take, that leap of faith based on our intuition and follow our dreams and passions, that's where we find fulfillment. And so however that looks and manifests in your life, whether it is acting or, whatever it is, but it's just like, if it's that gut feeling, follow it, because once you do that, these opportunities come in, and you're truly happy in that process. So I think that is the biggest takeaway, because I think it doesn't matter what your craft or what your career is, but I think that's the principle. But from a tactical standpoint, I think there's a couple different things that people. So the day I decided to leave school, this woman basically asked me two questions. She said, what is the worst thing that could happen if you left school to travel? And then what is the best thing? And those two questions literally changed my life, because of course, the worst thing, I catastrophized like it was nobody's business. I played the what if game, and I never before that vocalized my fears. And when I said them aloud to her, I was almost laughing, because they were so out there and probably unrealistic that it was funny. But I believed it because it was suppressed within me. So first, really getting realistic about the worst case scenario and getting it out there, speaking it to someone, and then asking yourself the best case. And if you can live with the realistic worst, immerse yourself in the best case scenario and act out of that state of consciousness, because I feel, it's kind of like the fear versus love, abundance versus scarcity. And of course, look, you have to be a little bit realistic. There are potential downsides, but if you can live with the downside, take the upside. So that was that's something I've used consistently, not just in that moment. I mean, that's probably the biggest decision I've ever made, right? Was leaving college to go on this journey.
Right.
But those questions apply to every situation. And I think especially if someone doesn't have the clarity of what they want to do, kind of like what we just talked about, maybe take a couple of days off. And, I'm a writer, so I recommend writing, but like so many people I've met, especially lately, who are like above like 17, 18, I'm like, what do you want to do? And like, they forget what even excites them or makes them curious. So I just say like, write down everything that's ever excited you. And I actually did this exercise, and it was like, wow, like it gets you so excited, and you start to realize things that you've like wanted to do, but you've just kind of suppressed them because, you've kind of, someone might have told you your dreams were cheesy or unrealistic, or you couldn't do this thing, and you believe them. But like, let yourself, go wild a little bit. And of course, you may not be able to do all of it, but like, let yourself think. Like, give yourself permission to know that you can do some of these things. And I think that those lessons have been really powerful for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that a lot. And that perspective of, okay, let's look at sort of worst case and let's plan for best case. And if, and then take that. If you're comfortable with worst case, if you can deal with it, then there's no reason not to go for the best case, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that a lot. So you talked a little bit about your skin condition, and you actually overcame it with. And I'd like to hear a little bit about how you did that.
Yeah, absolutely. So from the time I left school to leaving on this trip was about a 2-month period, and when I came home. So I came back to school January 15th, I think. But January 1st, I remember because it was New Year's, I saw this holistic doctor while I was back home. And he said, stop eating gluten, soy, and dairy. And I was like, why? And he said, because it's probably contributing or possibly causing your skin stuff. So I listened to him. And slowly, I would say after about a month or so, things started to ease up a little bit. But I still believe to this day that wasn't the root cause of it. And I had another breakout, even despite being on this elimination diet, I had a breakout. And afterwards, I kind of made this decision that with or without my skin condition flaring up, I was going to travel and I wasn't going to let it dictate my life. And interestingly enough, then a couple days later, I buy my ticket to Guatemala. I found this opportunity. And then literally a couple days before I leave on my trip, my skin really starts to clear up. This is about 2 months after. And looking back, of course, I had a couple of things like I mentioned, my skin is still sensitive today and heat does not help and all that stuff. But the chronic skin stuff that was almost everyday hives, rashes for 6 months, that was caused from stress, which would have blown my mind. And also very frustrating because I do remember someone saying, oh, you're probably just stressed. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm not. It's not something that I could not control. I didn't have the coping mechanisms, but most importantly, I was misaligned. I was just working so hard at something that I had no passion for. I just felt literally and figuratively like I was not in my own skin. Maybe that's not the best analogy, but you get the point. And when I made that, but when I made the decision to live life based on my own terms and do the thing that called out to me, that gut feeling, it really started to get better. And I think that is really fascinating. And it's interesting. Yesterday, I talked to this kid who I hadn't spoken to with 2 years, went to my high school. And he said he was reading the beginning of my book. He's like, man, I had the same thing with the skin stuff. And I went through all these tests too. And, it was stress for me. And he was like, I was talking to other people and they were going through this too. And I was like, oh my goodness, all these people are going through it. And, I'm very grateful to have all, the access I had to these Western doctors at college. But it was interesting that, a lot of times the skin is just the Band-Aid, right? And it's not the root. And so when I addressed the root, although not knowing that was the root, it really dissipated.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point. It is, it's sort of like an effect from, what is the cause? And of course, Western medicine a lot of time is trying to treat it not at the root. And when you get down to the root of any sort of condition, it's always, rooted energetically somehow in your being. And when you're misaligned with your purpose or feeling anxious or depressed or, any of those things, then you're going to see symptoms from that. And, of course, these things are sort of speaking to us. And I think, we need to really be asking the question, not like, oh, how do I get a topical treatment to put on this, but rather, why is it there to begin with? And how do I get to the root of why I have this symptom? And when you sort of even start approaching things from that perspective and then ask, put it out there to the universe, meditate on it, really want to get to the root of the problem, then now you're sort of taking a journey of self-healing. In your case, you sort of did it without knowing, right? But yeah. I think you can understand how these conditions, how they're rooted at a deeper level in our emotions and psyche, and how do we bring it to the surface for healing and healing ourselves. And of course, depression and anxiety cause so much dysfunction and symptoms in people's lives. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is, so what's next for you? I mean, Jake, you've done a lot in a short period of time. I mean, have you made any sort of next moves, next plans, anything that you're feeling called to do? Travel, write another book, speaking engagements? What is the loose plan? Yeah. So currently I am doing speaking, like mostly at high schools, in the San Diego and LA area, which cool. I'm very passionate about, because I think, it's cool that I'm young, that I can connect more with high school students as opposed to someone who's older. So I feel like I'm loving that, selling books. But I think, there's a lot of things that excite me and that are of potential interest, maybe working for a company that aligns with my vision, or working for someone else, or, maybe creating some online stuff. But I think, this trip to Mexico in about a month, I leave in about a month, will, maybe give me a little more insight into what I want to do. Maybe not. I'm not going into it with that expectation, but I feel like I'm excited to take like a week away from this kind of everyday stuff. And, maybe the next time we speak, it will, I'll have a little more clarity on exactly what I'll be doing, especially in 2017. Yeah. Well, and of course I said loosely because I don't believe you need to know your exact next step. You need to continue to follow your gut and follow your intuition, and it will lead you right where you need to be. And I think you figured that out at a very young age, and you're very wise for doing so, and inspiring others to do the same, because it's scary, right? Especially when you've lived your life the opposite, doing what you've been told your whole life. It's it is indeed a leap of faith, but one that I've yet to come across anyone who regrets taking a leap of faith and sort of like, okay, I'm just going to follow where the wind takes me and follow my highest calling and not worry about, what the box tells me I need to be, how people tell me I need to be in this particular box, and just kind of put that aside and go off the beaten path, right? Absolutely. Off the beaten trail. There we go. Yeah. So, okay, I got one, I got a couple more questions for you. One, we always talk on this show a lot about the ultimate nature of reality and, spirituality and things like that. So curious, it seems to be a lot of younger people now are coming in with more of an expanded perspective on this. So it's kind of a big question, but curious, what are your thoughts? You've experienced quite a bit for such a young guy. What are your thoughts on, what's going on here, and, from a spiritual perspective? Going on here is in the sense of like consciousness as a whole, or? Yeah, on planet Earth. What are we doing here? Yeah, well, I definitely think there is, there are a lot of people kind of awakening to this, and understanding like that there's more to life than just this physical realm, that, it's an obligation that we take care of each other and, the planet. I think my generation, one of the amazing things about social media is maybe in the past media has shaped people's reality a specific way, but social media, like now people are becoming aware to all these things that just, previous generations just did not even have access to.
So I think there is a conscious shift, especially, my age. So I'm like the edge of the millennials, kind of borderline Gen Z. And so millennials and Gen Z, especially, like we witnessed the recession. We witnessed a lot of these, our parents and things where the American dream was getting the car, getting the house, blah, blah, blah. But like, I think living with purpose, being intentional and, living a life that matters and makes a difference in the lives of others is a big component of, what's going on. And I think that it's amazing. I'm grateful to be in it and living at this time. And I think it's just only going to improve as we grow as humans.
Well, I would agree. And if, as one thing that a lot of people are very concerned about what's happening on the planet and we're destroying it. And one of the things that really inspires, encourages me is how many young people seem to be aware and have an expanded perspective. It's sort of like, just referencing back to my son in this reading last weekend. She talked about how sort of things open up for him really quickly in this new chosen profession for him, and how that's pretty rare considering, you hear about pursuing some of these things, in the entertainment world, especially. It's like, such a small percentage make it and so forth. And one of the things that she said, she goes, well, he's paid his dues in past lives. And, there's a lot of clarity there with him. I can look at him a lot of times. I'm thinking, man, you're more like the dad and I'm more like the kid in some ways, and I see that a lot as I connect with young people, even younger than you guys, really little. Some of these, 10-year-olds that are talking and you hear them talk and you can just tell these are souls that have a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom innately. And I think, we can all learn from the sort of those of you guys that are coming up, have a lot to share and a lot to teach. And Jake, you're doing a great thing here. And I definitely appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And I look forward to following your journey, and we'll have to circle back around and bring you on again sometime.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate it. And I'm excited to hear what your son, how his
maybe you guys will connect sometime.
I'm really fascinated. It's super cool to hear him, following that. So I would love to hear more about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a synchronistic interview and in discussion to have with you because it is so relevant to some of the choices that you've made to sort of take those leaps of faith, or ones that he's just approaching. And of course, me being how I am, I'm definitely a backer as opposed to. But you can imagine how many traditional parents, more traditional than me, parents there are out there. No, you've got to go to school. You've got to do this. You're going to be a loser. You're going to be, how many kids, young people out there are up against that sort of parent in their ear that's scaring them way worse than the system is in regards to following their dreams. And, I think that's, I won't say it's unfortunate because everyone has their path and everything is for a reason, I would say, but certainly more challenging of a road to sort of rail against that, and as opposed to being supported, right?
Yeah, that's probably the toughest question I get from students when I speak is my parents want me to do X and they're not very willing. Yep. But I always say, get a counselor, tell what you want to a school counselor, and then help them bridge that conversation, because it is a tough one. And, like you said, it's not necessarily unfortunate, but it's much more difficult to navigate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jake, thank you so much for taking the time, my friend, to come on the show. And I do have one last question for you that I always leave off with my guests. And it is 60 seconds or life. 60 seconds or life. 60 seconds or less. What is the meaning of life, according to Jake Heilbrunn?
Wow, that is powerful. Okay, the meaning of life to me is following our curiosity, following our bliss, following our gut, and seeing where that leads us, being able to act on that. And I believe that when the meaning of life is for us to realize our potential and act on it. And in that process, we get to make a difference in the lives of others, because at the end of the day, it is our connection and our impact and how we contribute to other people that matters most. And when we can, act on act on that and rise up together, and each of us be working and doing the thing that we love and coming together, then that will just, I think, raise the consciousness of the planet and ultimately sums up what it means to be fully alive, fully aware, and fully awake.
Yeah, our whole conversation really makes me think of a quote by Terence McKenna, the psychonaut, psychedelic explorer, and I'll read it here to leave off on this episode. Nature loves courage. You make the commitment, and nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible. Dream, and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. This is the trick. This is what all these teachers and philosophers who really counted, who really touched the alchemical gold, this is what they understood. This is the shamanic dance in the waterfall. This is how magic is done, by hurling yourself into the abyss and discovering it's a featherbed.
Wow, that is powerful.
Yeah, very powerful, isn't it? Thank you so much, Jake. Such a pleasure, my friend. I look forward to following your journey, and stay in touch. And until next time, journey well, my friend.
Likewise, Brandon. Thanks so much.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download from our hearts and minds to yours, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes, since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting. Your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.